The moment I walked into that ballroom, I heard her say it. Sloan Whitmore, my brother's perfect fiancée, leaning toward her bridesmaids with a glass of champagne in her manicured hand. Her whisper was loud enough to carry across the room, and I know she meant it that way. "Oh, great, the stinky country girl is here." Her friends giggled like a pack of hyenas in designer dresses. Sloan didn't even bother to look at me when she said it. I was that insignificant to her. Just some embarrassment that crawled out of a small town to ruin the aesthetic of her perfect engagement party. What Sloan didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that I signed the deed to this hotel 3 years ago. The Monarch Hotel. Every chandelier above her head, every piece of silverware she was eating with, every square inch of Italian marble beneath her overpriced heels belonged to me. And by the end of tonight, that whisper was going to cost her everything she ever wanted. My name is Bethany Burns. I'm 31 years old and I grew up in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a town so small that the only traffic jam we ever had was when old Mr. Henderson's cows escaped and blocked Main Street for 3 hours. I left home when I was 18 and I never really looked back, not because I hated where I came from, but because my family made it crystal clear there wasn't room for me there. See, I have an older brother, Garrett, the golden child, the son who could do no wrong. Growing up, everything I did was measured against him, and I always came up short. If I got an A, Garrett had gotten an A+. If I made the softball team, Garrett had been team captain. My mother, Patricia, had a special way of looking at me that made me feel like a rough draft, while Garrett was the finished masterpiece. So I left. I packed one suitcase, took a bus to the city, and started over with nothing but $200 and a stubborn refusal to fail. Everyone back home thought I was struggling. They pictured me in some tiny apartment eating instant noodles, which was true for the first 2 years. But what they didn't know was that I took a job as a cleaning lady at a boutique hotel, and that job changed my life. I learned everything. I watched. I studied. I worked my way up from cleaning rooms to front desk to assistant manager to manager. I saved every penny, invested carefully, made smart choices, and took risks when they felt right. By 28, I owned my first property. By 30, I had 3. Now, at 31, I run Birch Hospitality, a company that owns 6 boutique hotels across the East Coast. The Monarch is my flagship, my pride and joy. But here's the thing about building something from nothing. You learn to stay quiet. You learn that people underestimate you, and sometimes that's the most powerful weapon you have. So I never told my family. They never asked anyway. To them, I was still the struggling little sister who couldn't measure up to Garrett and his middle management job at an insurance company. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Tonight, I received an invitation to Garrett's engagement party. Last minute, of course. Probably my mother's idea, a guilt invitation so she could tell her friends that the whole family was there. I almost didn't come, but something pulled me here. Maybe curiosity, maybe some small, stubborn hope that things had changed. They hadn't. I stood in the entrance of my own hotel, wearing jeans and my favorite boots, my hair still smelling faintly of the countryside because I'd driven through Millbrook on my way here just to remind myself where I came from. My outfit probably cost more than everything Sloan was wearing combined, but you wouldn't know it by looking. That's the thing about real money. It doesn't need to scream. And honestly, you can take the girl out of the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the girl, though you can definitely take the farm girl's money straight to the bank. I spotted my mother across the room, holding court with some of her friends, probably bragging about Garrett's wonderful fiancé and their wonderful future together. Garrett stood next to Sloan, looking like a man who had won the lottery. He had no idea he was holding a losing ticket. Sloan finally glanced my way, her smile sharp as a paper cut. She didn't recognize me as anything other than an inconvenience, a stain on her perfect evening. That was fine. Let her think I was nobody. Let them all think it. I had learned a long time ago that the best revenge isn't loud. It's patient. It's quiet. It's watching people dig their own graves while they're too busy looking down on you to notice the shovel in their hands. So I smiled back at Sloan, walked to the bar, and ordered a drink. My staff knew not to acknowledge me. Wesley Crane, my general manager, caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod. Everything was running smoothly, Everything was perfect. For now, because in about 3 hours, Sloan Whitmore was going to learn a very important lesson. Never underestimate the country girl, especially when she owns the ground you're standing on. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I see every single comment, and it means the world to me. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to the story. The engagement party was exactly what you'd expect from someone like Sloan. Extravagant, over the top, designed to impress people who were already impressed with themselves. There were ice sculptures shaped like swans, a champagne fountain that seemed excessive even by champagne fountain standards, and enough flowers to make a botanical garden jealous. My hotel staff had done an amazing job, which made me proud, even though I wanted to roll my eyes at every design choice Sloan had made. I took my drink and found a quiet corner to observe. That's when my mother found me. Patricia Burns approached like a woman who had smelled something unpleasant and was trying to locate the source. She looked me up and down, her eyes stopping at my boots with visible disapproval. She said it was nice that I could make it, her tone suggesting it was anything but nice. Then she asked why I couldn't have worn something more appropriate, mentioning that Sloan's family was very refined. She stressed the word refined like it was a vocabulary word I should study. I told her I came straight from work and didn't have time to change, which was true. I just didn't mention that work meant running a multi-million-dollar hotel company. My mother sighed the way she always sighed at me, like I was a constant disappointment she had learned to tolerate. She told me to at least try to make a good impression on the Whitmores, then disappeared back into the crowd to continue her social obligations. And there it was. 20 seconds of conversation, and I already felt like I was 12 years old again, failing to meet some invisible standard I was never told about. I spotted Sloan across the room, air kissing her way through a group of guests. The woman had kissed more cheeks tonight than a politician at a county fair. Every gesture was calculated, every smile measured for maximum effect. Her parents, Franklin and Delilah Whitmore, stood nearby like proud peacocks watching their prized peahen work the room. Franklin was a large man with a red face, and the kind of confidence that comes from either genuine success or excellent acting. Delilah was thin, polished, dripping with jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. They looked wealthy. They acted wealthy, but something about them felt off, like a beautiful painting hung slightly crooked. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but I would. Garrett finally noticed me and made his way over. My big brother, 3 years older, still looking at me like I was his annoying little sister who followed him around when we were kids. He said he was glad I could come, though his tone said he hadn't noticed whether I was there or not. He asked if I'd met Sloan yet and said she was amazing. I told him I'd seen her. I kept my opinions to myself. Garrett nodded, already looking past me to see who else he needed to greet. Some things never change. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. He mentioned that Mom had given Sloan Grandma's necklace as an engagement gift. He said wasn't that generous of her and that Sloan absolutely loved it. I felt the air leave my lungs. Grandma's necklace. The antique pendant our grandmother had promised to me, specifically before she died. She had held my hand and told me it was for me because I was her dreamer, her fighter, the one who would make something of herself. My mother knew this. She had been in the room when Grandma said it, and she gave it to Sloan anyway. I looked across the room and saw it. There it was, hanging around Sloan's neck like it belonged there. My grandmother's necklace, my inheritance, my memory, sparkling under the chandelier lights while Sloan laughed at something someone said. The DJ cranked up the music so loud I could feel my fillings vibrate. If I wanted my teeth rattled, I would have just gone to the dentist. At least there I'd get a free toothbrush out of the experience. I excused myself from Garrett and made my way to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. That's when I passed Franklin Whitmore in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, his face tight with stress. He didn't see me. He was too focused on his conversation. I heard him say they needed this wedding to happen, that the Burns family had money enough to cover their situation. He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. Then he said they just needed to get through the ceremony, and after that, everything would work out. He hung up and walked back toward the party, his salesman's smile sliding back into place like a mask. I stood frozen in that hallway, my grandmother's necklace forgotten for the moment, replaced by something much more urgent. The Burns family had money. What money? My parents had a nice house, sure, but I knew for a fact there was a second mortgage on it because I'd been secretly paying it off for the past 4 years. Garrett worked a decent job. Nothing spectacular. There was no family fortune. So why did Franklin Whitmore think there was? And more importantly, what exactly was their situation that needed covering? I spent the next hour watching the Whitmores like a hawk watches a field mouse. Every smile, every handshake, every perfectly timed laugh. Now that I knew something was wrong, I could see the cracks in their performance. Franklin kept checking his phone, his jaw tightening every time he read a message. Delilah's jewelry was impressive, but I noticed she kept touching it nervously, like she was afraid it might disappear. And Sloan, beautiful, perfect Sloan, had a hunger in her eyes that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with desperation. I started piecing things together. The Whitmores thought my family had money. But why? Then it hit me. For the past 4 years, I had been sending money to my parents anonymously through my company, Birch Hospitality. Every month, a payment would arrive to cover the mortgage, the utility bills, the medical expenses when my father had his knee surgery. I never put my name on it. I didn't want their gratitude or their questions. I just wanted to help from a distance. But my parents didn't know it was me. And apparently, my mother had decided it must be Garrett. Of course she did. In her mind, her golden child was secretly taking care of them, being the responsible, successful son she always knew he was. I could practically hear her bragging to her friends about how generous Garrett was, how he always looked after his family, the money I sent, the sacrifices I made, and Garrett got the credit. The irony was so thick it could have walked into the party and ordered its own drink. So the Whitmores did their research. They saw a nice house with no visible mortgage payments. They heard Patricia bragging about her son's investments. They saw a family that appeared to have hidden wealth. And they targeted Garrett like sharks smelling blood in the water. But here's the problem with their plan. The money wasn't Garrett's. There was no family fortune. The Whitmores were chasing a mirage. And when they found out the truth, my family would be left with nothing but the fallout. Unless someone stopped it. I found Wesley Crane near the service entrance, clipboard in hand, overseeing the catering staff. He looked up when I approached, his professional mask slipping into genuine warmth when he saw it was me. He quietly asked if everything was all right, calling me Ms. Burns before I shot him a look. He corrected himself and just called me Bethany. I told him I needed a favor. I needed background information on the Whitmore family, anything he could find, business records, news articles, whatever was out there. Wesley didn't ask why. That's what I appreciated about him. He simply nodded and said he'd see what he could dig up. He disappeared with his phone already in hand. I went back to the party trying to act normal, which was getting harder by the minute. That's when Sloan found me. She appeared beside me like a designer-dressed ghost, her smile so sweet it could give you cavities. She suggested we should chat, just the two of us to get to know each other. She put her hand on my arm like we were old friends. I let her guide me toward a quiet corner near the restrooms. The moment we were out of earshot of the other guests, her smile vanished like it had never existed. She told me she knew about me. She said she knew I sent money home every month, playing the good daughter from a distance. But here's what confused her, she said. Why would someone who could barely afford their own apartment send money to family that didn't even like them? I felt my jaw tighten but kept my expression neutral. She continued. Unless, she said, I was trying to buy their love, trying to prove I was worth something. Pathetic, really, she told me. She leaned closer and said I should know that Garrett told her everything, how I was always jealous of him, how I couldn't handle not being the favorite, how the family only tolerated me out of pity. She smiled again, but this time it was sharp and cruel. She said she was going to marry Garrett, become part of this family, and honestly, she thought it would be better for everyone if I just stayed away. She said nobody would miss me. She called me dead weight, then patted my arm like she was comforting a child and walked away. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Sloan thought I was broke. She thought the money came from Garrett. She had no idea who I actually was. It was like watching someone brag about how amazing their rental car is to the person who owns the entire dealership. Honestly, if arrogance burned calories, Sloan Whitmore would be invisible. Wesley appeared at my elbow, startling me from my thoughts. He handed me a folder and told me I needed to see this. His face was pale, his usual composure shaken. He said the Whitmores weren't just in debt. They were being investigated for fraud. I opened the folder right there in the hallway, scanning the documents inside. Financial records, court filings, news articles. The more I read, the colder I felt. The Whitmores weren't who they claimed to be. Their real estate empire was a house of cards built on lies and other people's money. They were 6 months away from bankruptcy and federal investigation. This wedding wasn't about love. It was an escape plan. I took the folder to my car in the parking garage, needing privacy to process what I was reading. The overhead lights flickered like they were as shocked as I was. The documents painted an ugly picture. Franklin and Delilah Whitmore had been running what amounted to a Ponzi scheme for years. They collected money from investors for real estate developments that either didn't exist or were wildly overvalued. Early investors got paid with money from later investors, the classic con. But the house of cards was finally collapsing. Investors were asking questions. Auditors were circling. Federal investigators had opened a case. The Whitmores needed an exit strategy, and fast. Enter my brother Garrett. I could see their logic, twisted as it was. Find a family that appeared to have money, marry into it. Use the connection to shore up their crumbling reputation, or at minimum, have somewhere to hide when everything fell apart. They probably planned to drain whatever assets my family had before disappearing to start the con somewhere else. What they didn't realize was that my family had nothing. The house was mortgaged. Garrett's salary was average. The only money flowing into the Burns household came from me, and I could stop that with a single phone call. The Whitmores were about to discover they had targeted the wrong family, and when they did, they would abandon Garrett faster than a sinking ship, leaving my brother heartbroken and my parents humiliated. Part of me wanted to let it happen, let them all suffer the consequences of their choices. My mother, who gave away my inheritance without a second thought. My brother, who never once stood up for me. Let them feel what it's like to be discarded, overlooked, cast aside. But I couldn't do it. As much as they had hurt me, they were still my family. Garrett was still the boy who taught me to ride a bike, even if he had forgotten that somewhere along the way. My mother was still the woman who stayed up all night when I had chicken pox, even if she later decided I wasn't worth remembering. Family is complicated. You can love people and be furious with them at the same time. You can want to protect them even when they don't deserve it. So I made a decision. I was going to expose the Whitmores. I was going to save my family from a disaster they didn't even know was coming. And I was going to do it my way. I called my lawyer first. Rebecca Thornton answered on the second ring, despite it being 8 o'clock at night, which is why I paid her what I did. I gave her a summary of the situation and asked how quickly she could verify the information in the folder. She said she'd have confirmation within the hour. Next, I called Naomi Delaney, a forensic accountant I had worked with on a complicated acquisition 2 years ago. Naomi was a wizard with financial records, the kind of person who could look at a spreadsheet and tell you what someone had for breakfast. I sent her photos of the key documents and asked her to dig deeper. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take just 1 second to drop a like and leave a comment. It really helps me keep creating these stories for you, and I genuinely appreciate every single one of you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, let's get back to Bethany. Naomi called back in 40 minutes. Her voice was tight with the excitement of someone who had found something big. She told me I was right. They were running a Ponzi scheme. Textbook stuff. But here's the interesting part, she said. She had looked up the Whitmore name in other states and found something in Arizona from 3 years ago. Same pattern, same scheme, different names. She said the bride's real name wasn't Sloan. She asked if I was ready for this. I told her I was ready. Naomi told me the bride's real name was Sandra Weems. She said the parents weren't even her real parents. They were partners in a long-running con, and they had been doing this for at least a decade. Different identities, different targets, same game. I sat in my car, the folder in my lap, and started laughing. I couldn't help it. These people had more identities than a Hollywood actress has ex-husbands. Sandra, Sloan, probably planning to be Stephanie next year. My phone buzzed with a text from Garrett. I looked at it for a long moment before opening it. He wanted to know if we could talk. He said something about Sloan felt wrong. I checked the time. 5 minutes until 9 when Franklin Whitmore was scheduled to make his big welcome to the family toast. Too little, too late, big brother. You should have trusted that feeling an hour ago. You should have trusted me years ago. But better late than never. At least he was starting to see through the mask. I got out of the car and walked back toward the hotel. The Arizona night air was warm, and somewhere inside, a con artist in a white dress was about to have the worst night of her life. Time to crash an engagement party. I walked back into the Monarch Hotel with a different energy than when I'd left. Before, I was the invisible sister, the country girl everyone looked down on. Now, I was a woman with a plan. Wesley met me near the service entrance, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. He said he had been watching the Whitmores all evening, and that something was definitely off with them. He mentioned that Franklin had made 4 phone calls in the past hour, each one leaving him more agitated than the last. I told Wesley I needed the AV system ready. I said that during Franklin's toast at 9, we were going to give the guests a presentation they would never forget. Wesley didn't even blink. He asked what kind of presentation we were talking about. I handed him a USB drive. On it were scanned copies of the most damaging documents from the folder, plus everything Naomi had sent me. Court records from Arizona, financial statements showing the fraud, photos of Sloan from 3 years ago under her real name, Sandra Weems, a paper trail of lies stretching back a decade. I told him when Franklin started his toast, I wanted it all on the screens. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. Wesley took the drive with a slight smile. He said he always knew working for me would be interesting, but this was something else entirely. Then he disappeared toward the control room. My phone buzzed. Rebecca, my lawyer, confirming everything Naomi had found. The Whitmores were indeed under federal investigation. More importantly, she had made a call to the lead investigator, a woman named Agent Carla Reeves, who had been trying to locate the Whitmores for months. They kept moving, changing names, staying one step ahead, until tonight. Rebecca told me Agent Reeves was already on her way with a team. They would be outside the hotel by 9:15, ready to move in once the evidence was public. Everything was falling into place. The trap was set. Now I just needed to wait. I found a spot near the back of the ballroom where I could see everything without being noticed. Sloan was working the room again, that fake smile plastered on her face like it was painted there. Garrett stood beside her, playing the dutiful fiancé, completely unaware that his entire future was about to implode. My mother was near the front, chatting with Delilah Whitmore like they were old friends. 2 women who had nothing in common except their ability to make me feel worthless. Soon, one of them would realize she had been played. The other would realize she had pushed away the wrong daughter. I checked my watch. 8:52, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Garrett. He asked where I was and said he really needed to talk. He said something about the Whitmores was bothering him, the way Franklin kept disappearing, the way Sloan deflected every question about her past. He said maybe he was being paranoid. I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell him to trust his instincts, to warn him about what was coming. But what would that accomplish? He had 34 years to trust me, to include me, to treat me like family. He chose not to. Besides, if I warned him now, he might warn Sloan, and I couldn't risk that. I typed back a simple response. I told him we would talk after the toast and to just wait. 8:56. Franklin Whitmore was straightening his tie near the small stage where the DJ had set up. He looked confident again, his salesman mask firmly in place. He had no idea what was about to happen. I thought about what Sloan had said to me earlier, how I was dead weight, how nobody would miss me, how I should just stay away. The funny thing about people who underestimate you is that they never see you coming. They're so busy looking down that they miss the moment you rise up. 8:59. Franklin stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. The DJ lowered the music. Guests turned to face him, champagne glasses in hand, ready to toast the happy couple. I made eye contact with Wesley across the room. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod. The screens behind the stage flickered to life, currently showing a slideshow of Garrett and Sloane's photos. Happy couple at a restaurant, happy couple at the beach, happy couple living their happy lie. Not for much longer. Franklin cleared his throat and began to speak. He said good evening, everyone, and thanked them all for being there to celebrate this beautiful union. He said when his daughter first brought Garrett home, he knew immediately that this young man was special. I almost laughed. His daughter. The daughter who wasn't his daughter. The daughter whose real name he probably had to remind himself of every morning. Franklin continued, talking about family, about legacy, about how honored the Whitmores were to join the Burns family. He talked about bright futures and grandchildren and building something lasting together. Every word was a lie, and every lie was about to be exposed. Franklin raised his glass. He said to the happy couple, to love, to family, to forever. I pulled out my phone and sent Wesley a single word, now. The screens flickered. For a moment, everyone probably thought it was a technical glitch. The happy photos of Garrett and Sloan disappeared, replaced by something else entirely. A document, official looking, stamped with court seals and legal terminology. Franklin's smile froze on his face. The document was a court filing from Arizona, dated 3 years ago. A fraud investigation. And there, listed as a person of interest, was a name nobody in this room had heard before. Sandra Weems. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People squinted at the screens, trying to understand what they were seeing. Franklin fumbled with the microphone, his face going from red to pale in seconds. He said there must be some mistake and called it a technical error. He turned toward the AV booth and shouted for someone to fix it, but the screens kept changing. Another document appeared, financial records showing investor money being funneled into shell companies. Then another. News articles about a real estate scheme in Phoenix that had cost dozens of families their life savings. Then photos. A younger Sandra Weems, different hair color, same cold eyes, standing next to Franklin and Delilah at some charity event under completely different names. Sloan stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. For the first time all night, her mask had slipped completely. She looked terrified. Garrett stared at the screens, then at Sloan, then back at the screens. I could see his mind working, pieces clicking together, the doubt he had felt all evening suddenly making horrible sense. Franklin tried to push through the crowd toward the exit, but 2 of my security staff stepped into his path. Delilah grabbed his arm, whispering frantically, but there was nowhere to go. That's when I stepped forward. I walked through the parting crowd toward the stage, my boots clicking on the marble floor. Every eye in the room turned to me, the country girl, the nobody, the dead weight. Wesley's voice came over the speakers, calm and professional. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, he would like to introduce the owner of the Monarch Hotel and CEO of Birch Hospitality." He said, "Please welcome Ms. Bethany Burns." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went white. Garrett's jaw actually dropped open. Even Sloan, in the middle of her panic, looked genuinely shocked. I took the microphone from Franklin's limp hand. I said, "Good evening, everyone." I apologized for the interruption, but I thought they might want to know who they were really celebrating tonight. I gestured to the screens behind me. I said Franklin and Delilah Whitmore were not who they claimed to be. Their real estate empire was a fraud. Their wealth was stolen from innocent investors, and their daughter Sloan was actually named Sandra Weems, a con artist who had been running this same scheme for over a decade. Sloan finally found her voice. She screamed that I was lying and called me a jealous, pathetic nobody. She said I was making this up because I couldn't stand to see Garrett happy. I smiled at her. I said, "That's interesting," and I asked if I also made up the federal investigation that had been following them for 2 years. I mentioned the arrest warrants that were issued last month in Arizona and said I was curious how I could have faked the fact that Agent Carla Reeves and her team were currently waiting outside this hotel. As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened. 4 people in suits walked in, badges visible, expressions all business. Sloan's face crumbled. Franklin tried to run. He made it about 10 feet before Agent Reeves intercepted him with a calm but firm hand on his shoulder. She told him that Franklin Whitmore, or whatever his real name was under arrest for wire fraud, investment fraud, and conspiracy. Delilah started crying, mascara running down her carefully made-up face. She kept saying there was a mistake, that they could explain everything, that it wasn't what it looked like. Sloan, Sandra, whatever her name was, turned to Garrett one last time. Her voice was desperate, pleading. She asked if he was really going to let his sister do this to them. She said they loved each other and that he had to believe her. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. The woman he thought he loved versus the evidence he couldn't deny. Then he did something I never expected. He stepped away from her. He said he didn't even know who she was. His voice was quiet, broken, but certain. He said he didn't know who any of them were. Sloane's expression shifted from desperation to rage in an instant. She lunged toward me, screaming that I had ruined everything, that I was supposed to be nobody, that I was just the stinky country girl. Security caught her before she reached me. I leaned close enough for only her to hear. I said this stinky country girl owned the room she was standing in, paid the salary of everyone who was about to escort her out, and would sleep very well tonight knowing exactly who she was. They led her away still screaming, her designer dress wrinkled, her perfect hair destroyed, her entire carefully constructed life falling apart with every step. I turned back to the stunned crowd, most of whom were still trying to process what had just happened. I said, well, the catering was already paid for, and it seemed like a shame to waste good food. I told them the bar would stay open for anyone who wanted to stick around. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. The DJ, bless his heart, started playing something upbeat. The engagement party was over, but the night was just beginning. The next hour felt like something out of a fever dream. The Whitmores, all three of them, were escorted out in handcuffs, while the remaining guests watched in stunned silence. Sloan, or Sandra, or whoever she would be in her next life, was still screaming threats as they put her in the back of an unmarked car. Something about lawyers, lawsuits, revenge. Empty words from an empty person. She went from future Mrs. Burns to future prison inmate in under 15 minutes. That had to be some kind of record, even for a professional con artist. Inside the ballroom, the mood had shifted from shock to something else. Curiosity, maybe. Fascination. A few guests were already on their phones, probably sharing what had just happened with everyone they knew. By morning, this story would be all over town. Garrett found me near the bar. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a nightmare only to realize he was still dreaming. His eyes were red, his hands shaky, his entire worldview clearly shattered. He asked how I knew. His voice cracked on the words. He asked how I figured it out. I told him I listened. I said I watched. I paid attention. All the things I had been doing my entire life while everyone else ignored me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry. He said he knew that didn't cover it, that it didn't cover years of treating me like an afterthought, but he was sorry. I studied my brother's face, looking for the catch, the angle, but all I saw was genuine remorse, maybe for the first time ever. I told him sorry was a start. We stood there in silence, two siblings who had spent decades as strangers, finally seeing each other clearly. Then my mother appeared. Patricia Burns looked smaller somehow, like the events of the evening had physically shrunk her. She approached slowly, uncertainly, none of her usual confidence on display. She started to say she didn't know, but I cut her off. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. Bank records, transfer receipts, 4 years of payments to her mortgage company, her utility providers, her medical bills, all from Birch Hospitality, all from me. I told her she thought Garrett was supporting them. I said she bragged to everyone about her generous, successful son. I let that hang in the air for a moment before I said it was me. It was always me. My mother stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. I said I didn't do it for thanks. I said I did it because they were my family, even when they made me feel like I wasn't theirs. But I thought she should know the truth about who was actually there for her. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, not the dramatic, performative tears I had seen her use at family events, real ones, the kind that came from somewhere deep. She whispered my name, Bethany, like she was saying it for the first time. Before I could respond, there was a commotion near the dance floor. I turned to see Sloane's grandmother's necklace, my grandmother's necklace, lying on the ground where Sloane had thrown it during her meltdown. Garrett walked over and picked it up carefully, like it might break. He looked at it for a long moment, then walked back to me. He said this was always supposed to be mine. His voice was thick with emotion. He said he didn't know Mom gave it away, and he was sorry. He placed the necklace in my hand. The weight of it felt right, like something that had been missing for years was finally back where it belonged. My mother watched the exchange with tears streaming down her face. She said she had been so wrong about everything. I didn't disagree with her, but I didn't pile on either. There would be time for difficult conversations later. Right now, I was just tired. A guest wandered over and asked if the party was still happening, looking confused but hopeful. I looked around the room. The ice sculptures were melting. The champagne fountain was still flowing. Half the guests had left, but the other half seemed determined to get their money's worth from the open bar. I shrugged and signaled the DJ to keep playing. Might as well. The night had already been weird enough. What was a little dancing going to hurt? 3 weeks later, I sat in my office at the Monarch Hotel, looking out at the city skyline. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. The Whitmores were finished. Federal prosecutors had enough evidence to charge them with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Sandra Weems, the woman who had called me a stinky country girl, was in custody, awaiting trial. Her bail had been set high enough that even her fake wealthy parents couldn't afford it. Turns out, when you spend decades stealing from people, you don't have many friends willing to help when things go wrong. The story made local news for about a week. Hotel mogul exposes con artists at family engagement party. One headline even called me the stinky country girl who owned the room. I had that one framed. It hangs in my office now, right where I can see it every morning. Garrett came to visit me at the hotel yesterday. It was the first time he had seen my office, my staff, the life I had built without anyone's help. He walked around touching things like he couldn't quite believe they were real. He said he had spent years thinking he knew who I was. He said he was wrong about everything. I told him we both had a lot of years to make up for. I said, maybe we should start now. We went to lunch, a real lunch, not a family obligation where we made small talk and avoided anything meaningful. We actually talked about our childhood, about our parents, about all the things we never said to each other. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was honest. That was more than we'd ever had before. My mother started therapy last week. She called to tell me, her voice small and uncertain, so different from the woman who used to make me feel like a constant disappointment. She said she wanted to understand why she had treated me the way she did. She said she wanted to be better. I told her I appreciated that. I said we could take things slow. And we would. Rebuilding trust takes time, but at least we were finally building something instead of watching it crumble. This morning, I was hosting a business breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Investors, partners, people who wanted to discuss expansion opportunities, normal stuff for a normal day. A young woman walked in looking nervous. She was wearing simple clothes, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes wide as she took in the elegant surroundings, clearly out of her element. One of my investors, a man named Gerald who had too much money and not enough manners, made a comment loud enough for everyone to hear. He asked who let her in and said this was a private event. I stood up from the table. I walked over to the young woman and extended my hand. I said her name warmly, calling her Nicole, and said I was so glad she could make it. I said everyone. I wanted them to meet Nicole Patterson, this year's recipient of the Birch Hospitality Scholarship. I told them she grew up in a small town in Ohio, worked 2 jobs to put herself through community college, and was about to start at Cornell's hotel management program in the fall. The room went quiet. Gerald suddenly found his coffee very interesting. I led Nicole to a seat at my table, the same table as the investors, the same table as the people who thought they were better than her because of their money and their connections. She whispered a thank you to me, looking overwhelmed. I told her not to thank me yet. I said the real work was just starting. But I told her if she ever felt like she didn't belong somewhere, to remember that the people who built the most beautiful things usually started with nothing but stubbornness and dreams. She smiled at that. After the breakfast, I stood in the lobby of my hotel watching guests come and go. Business people, tourists, families, all of them walking on floors I owned, sleeping in beds I paid for, completely unaware of the woman who made it all possible. And that was fine. I didn't need them to know. People will always try to make you feel small for where you came from. Let them. While they're busy looking down on you, they won't see you rising up. I learned that lesson a long time ago, back in a small town where I was never good enough, never pretty enough, never enough of anything. I carried it with me through years of struggle and doubt, and people telling me I would never amount to anything. And now, here I was, standing in my hotel, surrounded by everything I built, the stinky country girl. She smelled success coming from a mile away,